There's mashed potato. Hello and welcome to the S's. I'm Savannah Slater-Spargo. Today, my hair looks crazy, but I don't care, kind of, and neither should you, kind of. Today, actually, we're talking about something that is both serious and sensationalized. Despite my crazy hair, I wanted to jump on it because things are changing rapidly, and I couldn't really find like a whole recap of everything that happened, so I decided to create a video on it. So we're talking about the recent murder of UnitedHealth executive Brian Thompson and the current manhunt for the suspected shooter. Let's start with Brian Thompson. He became the CEO of UnitedHealth in April 2021 and was the current CEO when he was killed. UnitedHealth is one of the largest insurers in the United States. They provide healthcare coverage, they work with businesses and individuals, and they recently came under scrutiny for denying coverage. So because of this scrutiny, actually, the United States Justice Department launched an investigation, but right before this investigation launched, allegedly, Brian Thompson, who, by the way, received a total compensation of $10.2 million last year and owned about $20 million of the UnitedHealth shares in the stock market. Him, along with several other executives, sold their shares. He sold about $15 million worth of his stock just before the investigation started. Now, this is obviously not a great look. I don't think it's necessarily insider trading. I'm not sure if it is, but that's what Martha Stewart was involved with the justice system for. But it sounds to me, this is speculation, it sounds to me like the executives at UnitedHealth were tipped off in some way that this investigation was going to take place, and they decided to sell their stock, their shares, either because they knew that their shares would, like the value of the stock would be diminished because of the investigation, or perhaps to distance themselves from the profits earned by this company that has been denying millions of Americans health coverage. So again, that's pure speculation, but that's often where we see people kind of bailing or trying to distance themselves, is by financially distancing themselves. Now, Brian himself has been the leader of UnitedHealth. He has been involved in UnitedHealth or working for UnitedHealth, I think something like 20 years. But while he's been the leader, two very important things happen. One is that the company, their profits just skyrocket. So they jump from $12 billion in 2021 to $16 billion last year, so in 2023. And then the other thing that happens is it sounds like the Senate, the United States Senate, launched an investigation into healthcare companies denying coverage for seniors. And they produce a report in which they state that Mr. Thompson's company, quote, was cited for a surge in denials of post-acute care, which increased to 22.7% in 2022 from 10.9% in 2020. So it sounds like their denial rate jumped from 10.9% in 2020 to 22.7% in 2022. So that's a little bit of the profile of Brian Thompson, a little bit just professionally, and then really what's been happening in the public eye regarding UnitedHealth, just a little bit of background. But here's what happened on the day of the shooting. So, Brian Thompson was actually living in Minnesota at the time, and he was traveling to New York City for his company's annual investors meeting or conference. This is an opportunity. So, any company that goes public, that means that people that are outside investors or outside of the company are then able to buy stock. So, you're publicly on the market for other people to invest in. If this is driving you crazy, I'm so sorry. It was driving me crazy too. And it is what it is. Now I have to do both ears. Symmetrical. So once your company goes public, then other people then it's like publicly traded in the stock market. People outside of the company, people outside of immediate investors can begin to buy stock. So you do want to give, I think it's done annually, but it can be done more frequent than that. But you do want to give your stakeholders and investors, a clear picture of what's going on in the company, why they should continue to invest, that sort of thing. So this is the meeting that he was going to in New York City. And something that's important to know is that the executives at UnitedHealthcare, including Brian Thompson, had previously traveled with security detail, and I don't know if it's because allegedly he had been receiving death threats. Maybe other executives have been receiving death threats. And then it sounds like the day of the shooting or a day after the shooting, there was a bomb threat. But during Brian Thompson's travel to New York City, he did not travel with security detail. Or they weren't with him at the time of the shooting. I don't know if he flew with them, but it doesn't sound like that. So a few minutes prior to Brian Thompson arriving to his meeting at the Hilton on 6th Avenue, and mind you, this is super early in the morning. This is super early in the morning for me. It's between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. So before this, a man is seen in winter clothing. It looks like he was wearing a dark coat, dark pants, a gray backpack, which will be important later. He was wearing a hood and a face covering that went above his nose, below his eyes. This part I've heard it reported two ways. So he either was waiting outside of the Hilton and popped into Starbucks, or as he was going to the Hilton, he stopped by a Starbucks, at which point he's caught on CCTV footage. He's caught on the Starbucks security camera. There's an animal in here. There's a cat in the closet. He also purchased a water bottle and some sort of snack, which was discarded in the alleyway close by. So they're pretty confident that that was him at the Starbucks. And then he's just kind of waiting outside of the Hilton. It's also reported that around 6:30, he made a phone call to somebody. So when Brian Thompson does arrive at the Hilton, he's approaching the doors to enter the building. And the man with the face covering, he comes out from behind a vehicle and he shoots Brian Thompson, I think twice in the back. Two things to note here is that there was an eyewitness literally standing right there. As soon as the shooter shot, the eyewitness takes off. The shooter does not appear to even pay that person any mind, just continues. The other thing that happens is it appears that in between the time the shooter shoots Brian in the back and the time Brian turns around and then slumps down either against the wall or just right there, I'm not really sure, the gun seems to have either jammed or he's doing something with it, either clearing a bullet from the chamber, or maybe he's just doing that in between shots, who knows, but he does something with his gun. As Brian Thompson is on the ground, he then shoots him again. Then the shooter takes off by foot. He walks. At some point he starts running. Then at some point he gets on an electric bike, which he takes into Central Park. Then he's seen on CCTV footage leaving Central Park, and he no longer has the backpack. Then he apparently gets into a cab. Well, he walks for a little bit, ditches, so he doesn't have the bike anymore. Walks for a little bit, gets into a cab, and then takes that cab, I think, to a bus station where he's then seen on other security footage entering a bus terminal. So we can assume pretty fairly that he's probably not in New York City anymore, especially since he came from outside of New York City. It appears that this was a pretty well thought out crime. Police and law enforcement suspect that the shooter actually arrived to New York about 10 days prior to the shooting by bus. So he checked into a hostel. This is a weird note, but on November 29th, he checked out of the hostel. Then, I believe he checked back into the hostel. I really want to say hospital. Checked back into the hostel the next day, so November 30th, this time, and I think both times paid with cash, and also at the Starbucks paid with cash. So this time checking into the hostel using a fake New Jersey ID. I don't know if he checked in to the hostel the first time, like, with his own information, and then the next time he checked in again, and they were like, they just hoped that it would be a different person checking them in. I don't really understand the logic behind that, but the rest of it, he arrived early. He checked into a hostel. There's actually footage of him in the hostel that they think is him. There's a little bit of dispute on that just because the lighting in the hostel footage is quite different than the lighting in both the Starbucks and the outside the Hilton footage, which is understandable because, you know, daylight could affect that. The lighting inside the buildings can affect that. I mean, there's so many things that can affect an image, right? And at this point in the hostel, they do get a image of his full face. He pulled down his face mask. But it is important also that he seems to have kept his face either covered or turned away from footage just while out and about in New York City, because if we know one thing about New York City, we know that there are cameras really everywhere. So for us not to have like a lot of really good photos, he had to have been paying some sort of attention, but it sounds like there are enough partial photos to potentially utilize facial recognition software. On the other hand, even though it seemed super organized, there's some weird things that happen, like the shooter just left a bunch of evidence behind. So, of course, those shell casings. If he loaded the gun without gloves, there will be fingerprints or even other DNA evidence on them. He did not pick up those shell casings from the crime scene. And there's also, if it jammed and that bullet was never shot, that's like a perfectly preserved bullet. So we'll see what happens with that. He also left that water bottle and the wrapper, it seems like down an alleyway close to where the crime took place. And they were able to take a partial print from the water bottle, but it is smudged. It sounds like he also may have ditched a burner phone. The police, law enforcement has not yet been able to access the phone that we know of. Finally, that gray backpack, I think they found it yesterday on Friday. So it sounds like they found that gray backpack in Central Park. It's not clear what was inside of it, but they're pretty confident because it was a pretty specific backpack. It was a name brand backpack. So they're pretty confident it's the same one that's been identified. They have not found the bike yet, though, assuming how cold it was, how he was dressed, and that he likely wore gloves. I would be surprised if very much evidence would be found on the bike, but that's just speculation. Speaking of which, let's speculate for a moment. So there's some conflicting things happening here, right? So we have a pretty organized suspect. And plan for the crime, we have a targeted attack, it appears. We have a gun that appears to have some sort of device or attachment. I think people are presuming this is some sort of silencer or suppressor. But you also have some rookie mistakes like leaving evidence behind, taking public transit where you know there will be a lot of CCTV footage, lots of security cameras. Security cameras. It broke twice. Security cameras. And not taking those precautions to keep your face either fully out of view or like he uncovered his face. So for example, one of the photos we have, the cat is being crazy, of his full face is at the hostel. If this is the same person, according to the person working at the hostel, he pulled down his face mask to smile at her because they were flirting. So, rookie. Am I right? He also was wearing, like I said, fairly recognizable items. Internet sleuths were apparently able to pretty quickly identify like this super expensive, like $200, $300 backpack, which was pretty easily, I mean, it's a light gray, it's kind of rectangular. I know my shapes. So it's pretty, yeah. There's a pretty decent amount of evidence piling up, and it sounds like we have DNA evidence, even though there's a partial print. Like, if the shooter put his mouth to that, we will have evidence that can then be matched later. So, even though he probably has left, what am I trying to say? Escaped, disappeared. Though he probably has fled, that's the word, to New York, no, from New York City. You know, if he's identified, if there's a good enough, you know, photo of him and somebody's able to give law enforcement a decent enough lead, they can pretty easily collect DNA evidence from their suspect and match it to things that were left at the crime. This might not have been a solo act, so, you know, anywhere from paying cash because cash runs out at some point, you're gonna need more money. You can't, I mean, it's really hard to disappear. It's really hard to run by yourself with only your own resources. So there's that. There's also that he was on the phone at around 6:30. Kind of interesting. He knew some pretty intimate details. I mean, he knew which door Brian Thompson would be walking into. He knew at what time he was going to arrive. So, those, I don't know, those are kind of difficult, that's kind of difficult information to have, to get without some sort of connection, and especially if you're not connected in any other way to intimately connected to that person, it is pretty hard to know about their specific whereabouts. Also, back to the bomb threat, it sounds like either the day of the shooting or the day after, Mr. Thompson's family was receiving bomb threats. They did investigate it, and they think it's like a hoax, like a doxing, but is that what it's called? Whatever. They think it's something like that, but I don't know. If I'm speculating, which I am right now, what if that's just a red herring? If this guy is not working solo, that's a great way to kind of throw a wrench into the investigation. And he also just seems to have a confidence about leaving DNA at the scene and just not really caring. I don't know if that's stupidity or if that's some sort of insurance that he has, maybe because he's working with somebody else. Again, all speculation. I'm pretty confident that they will find whoever did this. So, yeah, if you enjoyed this and if you would like to watch more serious, silly, stupid, and often sensationalized breakdowns, press the like button and subscribe. And if there's something complicated maybe in the news that you want me to cover, because you don't want to go through all of that yourself, then you can email me. It will be on the screen, hopefully. And, just remember, I'm not special, and neither are you, so just try to be a decent person. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time. Do